her condition was somewhat...
It was kind of a quiet time in their life.
Kind of a quiet time. And they got married during their junior year in college. And then he was accepted to Harvard Medical School, we learned. So, like, he's not just...
And I found this is really when you start getting to know him. You got to see when it finally started clicking. Okay, he's been to medical school.
Yeah. So, like, we learned, like, oh, Reese is a legit doctor.
Yes, he went to
He did
Harvard.
the things he said he was going to do.
Yeah.
To go learn to fix her heart. And, like, we learned he's accepted. Harvard Medical School is super prestigious. Like,
yeah.
That's not a
the
small
average
thing.
person cannot get into Harvard.
Exactly.
Yeah, he went to Harvard Medical School, and I wrote this down. I thought this was kind of cute.
Welcome to the Bookish Introverts podcast. Join host Amazon bestselling author Brett Nelson and avid reader Melanie Dyer as they dive in to review books they've read, then chat with the amazing authors behind them. Quiet minds, big bookshelves. You don't want to miss it.
He gets a fellowship at Harvard Medical School, and of course, he in his first day of anatomy class, his professor gives him 3 pieces of advice. First, drink unsweetened iced tea, which if you're in the South,
I was like, ew.
Yeah. Drink unsweetened iced tea because the tannin acids is good for your heart. And as is the absence of refined sugar. Which, okay, but no.
I mean, really, though, it did make me think maybe I should give up my sweet tea and just start drinking it.
Yeah, and when you're in the South, that is just a sacrilegious thought.
I don't know if I can do it.
Take an aspirin every day because it causes your arteries to become less sticky and less apt to catch plaque. Number 3, never take an elevator when there's stairs nearby, which I can say I do that. I very rarely take an elevator.
Do you really?
Yeah.
I need to be better.
I'm a stair person. Yeah. And then on the very last one, he gives them a little extra piece of advice. He pats a jar of M&Ms on his desk and says, "Oh, and control your addictions."
I did not realize how important that last piece of advice was going to be until like the very end. And
until
then I was
the very end.
Oh my gosh, that's why that's in there.
Yes. Yeah.
Because he puts these little breadcrumbs in there. I was like, that doesn't even make any sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like,
but he puts these little breadcrumbs in there. Again, there were several points in the book where I didn't think it was important until you got to that point in the story. Then you're like, okay, that insignificant thing was actually very important. Yeah. Again, the mark of a great author.
Yes.
Not every author has the ability. I don't even know if I have the ability to do that. You know?
I think you do.
So, yeah.
Yeah. So we also meet Dr. Trainer there, which is who you're talking about, which
Dr. Trainer
we learned is his mentor.
Yes.
And kind of trains him up. Did you like the part? I thought that was so funny where like he gets called on to go do the open heart.
Yes.
With Dr. Trainer.
It was
and like
very
Dr. Trainer, it almost makes it like he like has a major medical event himself and like passes out in the OR.
Yes.
I thought that was so funny.
So clever. Yeah.
Super clever. Because then we learned it was just a joke.
Yeah. He passes out. And so, of course, everyone in the room, all the nurses and everything, they're like, oh my gosh, we need to call Dr. So-and-so, but he's like 30 miles away and can't get here fast enough. And so
he just steps up to finish it.
Yeah. So he basically steps up to finish it. And well, then of course, Dr. Trainer stands up and goes, oh, this is just how I test the students. He said, and most students fail in the first 2 minutes.
Yeah. And they were saying though, that like they'd done it over 20 times or something. And Reese was the only one they'd let finish the surgery. He's
the only one that he has let finish the surgery. He said most students either soiled their pants or what was the other one? Anyway, it was kind of funny. A very unorthodox way of testing the students.
I thought that was super funny and interesting, but also I could totally see that like being something someone would do.
Yeah.
Although that then kind of makes me question, like, do I ever want to trust a surgeon again?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. But it's a glimpse into just how special Reese is, because out of all the hundreds of times that he's done this, Reese is the only person that was able to finish the surgery.
Yeah.
And at this point, he was still in medical school.
Yeah.
Or no, he was in a fellowship. Yeah.
So then we kind of continue on, like the next couple chapters I really think are more just about him remembering times with Emma and then his time through medical school and his fellowships and stuff. And we learned that in his second year in practice, like he graduates, makes it through, hones his skills. He's doing really good. The second year that he's in practice is when they buy the house next to Charlie.
Yes.
Charlie realizes like, hey, there's this land for sale right across from each other. They decide to go ahead and buy the land and they build their house. But we learned that Emma actually drew the plans out for the house, which I thought was because Emma's an artist. And I don't think we touched on that.
We didn't touch on that.
But there's like different artwork throughout the house that Emma either painted or, drew or whatever. And so she drew the plans for the house. And we also learned that like this is where we kind of figure out Reese kind of was unhealthily obsessed with trying to fix Emma
Yes.
to the point that he wasn't sleeping much.
Well, he was obsessed with staying awake at
so
night
he could feel her heartbeat.
because he wanted to hear her breathe, and he wanted to, because when you're a doctor, you have the ability to catch on to subtle changes.
Yes.
I mean, what a blessing to have someone like that in the house.
Yeah, absolutely.
Especially, but yeah.
And that was so poignant to me because not that I've ever had like a husband or an adult be sick around me like that, but even like the closest I can come to kind of understanding that is like as a new mom when Barrett was first born.
Mm-hmm.
I can remember those first 2 weeks literally not hardly sleeping at all because I was terrified that I was going to go to sleep and wake up and he wouldn't be breathing.
SIDS.
Yes.
Yeah. Sudden infant death syndrome.
And so to a point, I could kind of understand it like from that perspective of like, I remember not resting.
Yeah.
In those early days because I was scared to go to sleep. And so like that made sense to me. And also kind of like pulled at my heartstrings a little bit. So then he takes them, we go back to the present and he takes the girls to Annie's appointment, but he stays in the car.
Mm-hmm.
He recognizes one of the security guards though and almost gets busted out because that security guard's like, hey, why are you sitting back here?
Yeah, he tries to bust him.
And then the girls come down and so he leaves without being recognized. But Cindy accidentally leaves the pictures of Annie's heart in there in the car, and he looks at them and realizes like she's in trouble.
Yes.
Her heart, she's running out of time, basically, is kind of how I took it.
And I'm telling you, I've seen a picture of a heart like a sonogram or whatever. It's amazing to me that doctors can just look at it and be like,
and know what's on there.
And know what's on there, because to me it just looks like it doesn't look like anything.
Yeah. I had an ultrasound on my thyroid a few weeks ago. And I was laying there kind of looking at the screen and I was like, and she's making all these circles on the screen, and like making notes.
Like, what are you seeing? Even when you show it to me, I don't see it.
With a baby sonogram now, I'm a little better because I've had 3 of my own. So I can tell you more of like, I've seen enough of those now that I kind of know what I'm looking at. But like on that thyroid thing, I was like, what in the world? Are you like, it's like a bunch of mess.
They're like, you see this right here? And you're like, no, not really. But okay, sure. Yeah.
So I'm trying to think what happened next after that.
Well, we go through kind of a period of time where, it shows it's sort of a rapid progression. He goes to medical school, then he gets this residency and the fellowship. Then he spends 18 months at Vanderbilt.
Yes. Which is also super prestigious.
Super prestigious. And he gets a call from a hospital. So he's just honing his skills and all these things. He gets a call from a hospital in Atlanta who is starting a transplant program, and they want him to head it.
And so that's how they wound up back there.
That's how they wound up back there. And by this point, he's known as a very prominent transplant
kind of the
surgeon.
Preeminent.
Yes. Well,
and it talks about how his hands are smaller. Like, he's very delicate. And so he's able to work. They actually tap him to start working with children.
Yes, because he can do these tiny, intricate stitches
and get in the smaller places. And we learn that like that's kind of, so we figure out that he and Dr. Royer have teamed up because Dr. Royer is a great surgeon, but his hands are larger. So he deals with kind of the older patients, the adults.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
But they team up to work together.
Yes.
And so I was like, oh man, that's super interesting.
Yeah.
So then we kind of in the flashbacks, we start realizing Emma's getting sicker and sicker really quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And we learned that like he's been in his practice for a little while, and like now it's like that 4th of July weekend, and we figure out, did you find that really disturbing where he was talking about how he was basically keeping her alive with the dopamine injections?
Yes. Again,
I was disturbed.
Yeah.
But we also learned she's on the transplant list. And so they're trying to get her a heart.
Yes, they're trying to get her a heart. And I think this is the one where they finally get the first call that a heart has come in.
Yes, but she passes on it. She told him not to do it.
Okay.
Right?
Oh, yeah. She gave it a shot.
Yeah. She passes up, right?
Yeah, he comes home. They get the call that a heart has come in. He's on the phone with them.
Yes.
And the
Royer tells him it's a match for either Emma or for another patient of theirs, Shirley.
Shirley, yeah.
Who has young children.
Which is a conundrum.
Oh, can you imagine?
And this is really one of those spots where Reese could take advantage of. Well, if I have to choose between giving the heart to my wife or to this person over here, I'm gonna give it to my wife.
Right. And he could have done that and still been well within his scope as a doctor and a surgeon and all of that.
Yeah. And I'm sure he probably did waffle around it. Yeah, but Emma heard the conversation. Yeah, she overhears part of the conversation, and she comes up, and because like you said, she's got a family, she's got kids, she has
young children,
and she goes, honey, it's okay. I will be fine. Give it to Shirley. Can
you imagine?
That is like,
so heavy, so hard.
Like I'm not even a husband, and I can only imagine how that would be a horrible decision to have to make.
Yeah,
because my selfishness would want my wife to survive, not this random person that I don't even know.
Your wife to live.
Yeah, I'm sorry if she's going to die, she doesn't get the heart, but I want my wife to live.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So yeah,
that was a hard one.
Well, and this is so they decide that Shirley's going to get the heart. This is where one of the first things comes up that really threw me. So they do the surgery. He comes home and tells her, okay, the surgery went fine. Shirley's okay. He comes home and he tells her that Shirley's transplant was successful. And then he ends the chapter with Emma doesn't wake up. So it almost makes it sound like she died. But then in the next chapter, she was alive. Like, did I just read that wrong? Or because it talks about her, she does, and it was kind of at the end of that chapter. It says,
hang on, I'm gonna go look because I don't really remember, and I feel like I should. Ooh, I went too far. Okay. Let's see. She tells him to go on, give Shirley a hug for me. It was a success. Oh, okay, no, it says Emma wasn't there.
It says she wasn't there?
Yeah, it doesn't say she didn't wake up. It just says, when I woke in the darkness hours later beneath a booming umbrella of 4th of July fireworks, Emma wasn't there.
Oh, okay. I thought it said something. I must have just read it wrong.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it says Emma wasn't there. It says, with my phone not ringing and my beepers not beeping, with no patient awaiting my arrival, and with no heart en route via Learjet, I carried my wife to our bed, lay down next to her, placed my arm around her thin and bony waist, and closed my eyes. She locked her fingers inside mine and placed the warm skin of her back against my chest, and then the sleep crept in. When I woke in the darkness hours later beneath a booming umbrella of 4th of July fireworks, Emma wasn't there.
Okay. I just read it wrong. Okay.
But it was kind of misleading because it could almost be like Emma wasn't there and that she passed away, or Emma was physically not in the bed.
Yeah.
Because I had that same thought. Like, did she die? Okay. Or is she like literally not there?
I guess I took it in the sense, yeah.
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 But then the next chapter we jump into and it's back in the present day. So you're like, what?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's good.
So I can see why you were kind of thrown off by that.
Yeah.
Because that next chapter is where Cindy, like, once we figure out that we're back in the present day, Cindy makes the proposition to him about going and pulling all that old wood out of that barn on her parents' property.
Yes.
I did not know there was such a market for.
I didn't either.
But it is legit. I looked that up too because I was super interested. Well, because my husband's a carpenter.
Yeah.
And so I was really like, I asked him, I was like, is that a thing? And he goes, oh yeah. Like
yeah,
that
apparently
old,
they harvest it from old barns.
The patina on
it down. Yeah.
Yeah. Like it is a thing. Because as you're reading that and it talks about how much money they are able to make, like they go and take it and like sell it to a lumber yard, all this old pine, really good quality wood.
Yeah. Cindy calls him and says, there's this pecan grove over in blah, blah, blah town. Do you all want to go with it? Because she needed money.
There's an old barn that her family owned. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so she's all the time trying to think of ways to pay for because the whole kind of theme with her is like, she's trying to pay for the transplant surgery because they don't have insurance.
Yes.
So she's trying to raise money the whole time.
And they don't know when it's going to happen.
Right.
I mean, when you're waiting on when you're on a list like that, it could be at a moment's notice.
Yeah. So she's the whole time trying to raise money to find ways to make money to pay for Annie's surgery. And so this is the way she comes up with it. And like, I'm thinking, oh, they're going to get like not very much money. But then we realize later it's like a lot of money that they're able to make. I don't remember,
but it was
$58,000.
Oh, yeah. I was going to say it was tens of thousands of dollars
for that, for the wood.
Yeah.
And so they do that and take it back to her, and she's just like, wow, that's amazing.
And you get to see a little bit of Charlie and Reese time,
Yeah, and then that they go and like their interaction, like I love that how Charlie tells him he wants to go run and it's a wide open space.
They're in this pecan grove, and there's this long like stretch of land in between the rows of trees, and at the very end you can just
There's like a
barely see a
fence.
fence.
Yeah.
And of course Reese, is explaining,
Describing
what the area looks like, and he goes, I want to run to that fence.
wide open.
Yeah. And they do.
Yeah, they hold a stick between them.
So yeah.
So he's kind of a guide in a way, and they take off running. Like, and I think he says at the end of the chapter, before the end of the night, they had run it like 8 times or something.
8 times, yeah.
So as a runner, could you get it like why he wanted to do that?
Yeah, totally, yeah. I thought it was just a fun.
Their interactions.
Yes, I mean there was nothing special about it. There was nothing spectacular about the scene, but it was just friends being friends together.
Yes.
And I just, again, you don't see many strong male relationships or friendships.
Yeah.
And I loved
what a beautiful way to.
Yeah.
I liked it too. Well, and I think one of my favorite parts was the next chapter where they go back and they go to their burger spot, to the well again, and they take Cindy and Annie with them this time. And the prayer that Charlie says when he's like, God, you're the only one who knows what you're doing.
I wrote it in here and crossed it out.
Did you?
Yeah.
I loved that. Like where he was like, you're the only one who knows what you're doing. So, just come and hang out with us a bit.
And it caught the attention of everyone in the restaurant. Like everyone in the restaurant and their surrounding tables, like they saw him praying and they bowed their heads and everything stopped. I'm like,
because he prays for Annie too.
Yes.
Like, Lord, fix her.
Yes.
I
just loved
sweet.
that.
Yeah, I did
that
too.
emphasis on prayer, and that everyone around them, again, you don't get that these days.
No.
If somebody sees people praying, I mean, that's not anything that people outside of the Christian faith, they don't really respect it.
That's right. And we don't always do a great job. I try to remember when we're out in public to like stop and pray before each meal.
Yeah.
But I think it's so easy to just get caught up in the day to day that we forget about those little things. But that really is a touchstone that I want my kids. I remember that like there was not a single meal growing up that we did not pray before we ate.
Mm-hmm.
And I need to do better about that with my kids.
Yeah.
And that kind of was a moment where I was like, this is why that's important.
Yeah. And it was a very poignant moment.
Mm-hmm.
It was a very small moment in the book, but it was a very poignant moment.
Yeah, emotional.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So the next chapter is really where we learn the crux of what happened the day that Emma died.
Yes.
I was not prepared.
I wasn't either.
Like, I was really unprepared for this whole chapter.
Yes.
Oh my goodness.
Yes.
I could hardly think about it without like my heart racing a little bit.
Yeah.
It was crazy.
It was.
It was like watching a scene from ER.
A lot. It was. And a lot happens in this chapter. Yes. She collapses in the kitchen.
So we're back on the 4th of July night.
Yes.
Right. He's figured out that like she's not there. And what wakes him up, he's exhausted from working and having not slept enough.
Mm-hmm.
And when he wakes up, he hears glass breaking and he finds Emma.
Yes, she has
collapsed. You're going to have to talk about it because I can't. It just makes me almost physically ill.
Yeah, she has collapsed. She's on the floor and he has to jump into major life-saving techniques. He basically has to...
He's checking her pulse.
Yeah, and he has to crack open her chest.
Yeah.
This is that, yeah.
So they're in their kitchen, right? Like they're on the kitchen floor.
Yes. And I think Charlie hears some of the commotion and he winds up coming over and...
Yeah, he slips. So like before Charlie gets there.
Because Reese has to release pressure in her chest. So he has to basically let her blood gush out in order.
So we figure out he's had this like go bag, right?
Yes.
Full of tools.
Just in case
this
something like this happens.
So he opens her chest and starts surgery on the floor to try to save her. Which, I mean, obviously, when he does that pericardiocentesis is what that's called, where he sticks that needle in and like tries to draw the blood off of her heart that's putting so much pressure.
Yeah, well, the pericardium around your heart, you've got this layer. It's a sac, and it's filled. And when blood started escaping out of that heart, it can build pressure between your heart and your pericardium. And if he doesn't release that, basically it's going to squeeze her heart to the point that she dies.
Yeah.
And it causes a very bloody scene.
Yes, like it talks about how
It's
there's
not
blood spraying the
graphic.
walls and the like
Yeah.
floor. And I was literally sitting there going, "What is happening?
Yeah.
What is happening?"
It was literally like an episode of ER.
It was.
Yeah.
And so, but when Charlie hears the commotion, he runs over or swims over and like runs in, and he slips on the blood and hits his head,
Yes.
which is what causes his
blindness.
injury.
Yeah, it detaches when he falls. He kind of lands on his head, and it causes his
retinas
a
to
retina
detach.
detachment, and that's how he loses his sight.
Can you imagine? So, like, not only do you lose your sister that night, but you lose your sight.
Yeah.
And then to be Reese, where it's like you cracked your wife's chest open to try to fix her heart in this moment, and then your brother-in-law runs over to try to help, slips in the blood.
Yeah.
Ugh.
Just a tragic.
So much.
And so after Emma dies, this is when Reese gives it up. He's like, I'm done with medicine. He gets rid of...
because we learned that like what he tried to do was a procedure that he kind of developed.
Yeah.
And medical officials like praise it and were writing about it, even though it was unsuccessful and Emma dies. It was kind of a monumental, like groundbreaking procedure
in medicine. Yeah.
In that cardiology field.
Yeah. So in a way,
but he walks away.
In a way, her life was sacrificed in a big way because it opened up the door. Like, okay, this can really work in a real life situation.
Yeah. But he rejects it because she ended up dying, and so he just walks away from medicine altogether.
Yeah. I'm just saying, can you imagine being a paramedic and walking in and seeing a woman laying on the floor and blood dripping off everything?
It talks about how that EMT is just
like a crime scene.
Oh my gosh. And he doesn't know what to do.
Yeah.
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 They do try to save her. It doesn't work. So following that flashback, that's when there's a big storm.
Mm-hmm.
Charlie's out dancing in the storm because he can see the lightning flashes even though he's blind. I kind of loved that. Like his joy in that.
To see just a flash of light.
Yeah.
Like, again, how much do we take for granted our ability to see everything?
Yeah. Yes, that's true. Can you imagine to like...
Like he was literally dancing in the rain because he could see just a brief glimpse of a flash of lightning. Yeah. We take our sight for granted.
We absolutely do.
Yeah.
Yeah, we absolutely
But it was a very
just a poignant small moment.
Yeah.
But yeah. So after that we learned that like Reese just disappears for 8 months. And it even says like he doesn't even really know what he did. And I like that part where he says the receipts from his credit card would probably tell the tale of where he went.
Because he didn't know.
Because he couldn't tell you.
Yeah.
And I think that's a lot of people for a lot of people who walk through seasons of grief, that it is like that.
You're on autopilot. Over. Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So they go and strip the barn of the wood. We've already talked about that. They get the check.
And then during this part, Reese is walking down the road and he runs into Shirley and her family.
Yes, he sees Shirley. And
he sees her.
She recognizes him.
Yes. And he tries to avoid her
but she's not letting that happen.
No, she's not. And of course, her families, they're just kids, like, oh, we want to meet him. We want to talk to you.
Yes. And they're all hugging him and like telling him thank you.
So much gratitude. And she calls him Jonathan Mitchell.
Yeah. So I didn't really realize I
didn't either. I was like, who's Jonathan Mitchell? Was that his name originally in the story and he forgot to change it?
So, but we've learned he's gone by Reese, which is his middle name because that's what Emma called it.
Yes.
But his name is Jonathan Reese Mitchell.
But you don't know that. She calls him, and I wrote here about
who is this guy?
Shirley referred to him as Jonathan Mitchell, and I've got question mark. You don't know
who he is
until a little later in the book.
Yeah. Well, and that also kind of goes back to that flashback where he goes to that conference and they're talking about the Mitchell procedure.
Again, I didn't catch that.
I didn't catch it till the very end, but that's why. And that's why when they started talking about that, he got up. Because if you recall, he got up and leaves when they start talking about the Mitchell procedure. Yeah. He gets up and leaves the conference.
Yeah.
And doesn't go back.
Breadcrumbs.
Yes.
Sprinkled all through the book, and they don't make sense until he wants them to make sense. Yeah. Yeah. Amazing.
But it's well worth it. So now we're kind of back in he's really struggling against himself because he wants to save Annie and he knows that he has the skills to do it.
Yes.
But he's struggling against himself because he's walked away from it. But he does use his old credentials. He figures out that Royer has left all of his stuff open, and so he can still get in and look at files. So he hacks in to look at the files. And Royer, though, I guess is like been watching for him and waiting.
He knew eventually
he was going to come back.
It was going to come back.
Yeah. And so Royer calls him, leaves him a voicemail, and he's like, dude, I know basically that you've been in my files because nobody else would know how to do this. And I know it has to be you.
Yeah.
And he orders a test is what he does while he's in there.
Well, and he
on Annie.
When he's in there,
Reese
he looks at her records, and then Reese, he pays off all of her medical bills, and then gives them money to pay for a transesophageal echo test.
That's the one.
A TEE, and it's basically where they put a probe down into her heart, and she really needs this test. And so at that point,
Royer knows
that
this is who is getting into it, and he tells him, "You'd better come to the next appointment, or I'm going to tell him who you are."
Yes.
Because he knows that Reese hasn't revealed his identity yet.
Yes.
Oh, goodness. And so then Reese goes to see Dr. Trainer, who is retired at this point, just to kind of get, I think he needed like a touchstone.
He needs a mentor.
Yeah. Why did I get into this? Why did I do it? And I didn't feel like there was anything super profound in their conversation.
No, there wasn't.
But it was kind of a nice moment. And they do their big pig roast thing. I mean, that was fun, but.
That was fun. Nothing really. But one thing that I did that I thought was very interesting, let's see. I may be a little bit ahead of you. They're on the day. Is there anything you want to say before we get to the day of?
No, they go. He goes with them, right? He does go.
He goes with them. They're having her heart scan done.
The only thing I did want to touch on was like how she was scared, and she asks Reese if she should let Dr. Royer do the test, right?
Yes.
And he tells her, yes, you should.
Yes.
But he still doesn't tell her why he thinks that.
Yeah. And at this point, they don't know who he is yet. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, and we also learn, isn't that where she tells him like that the time before that she'd been put to sleep, she woke up during surgery?
Yeah, she woke up during surgery and can remember bits and pieces of.
Can you imagine how traumatic that would be? Oh my gosh.
Okay.
That's a fear of mine.
This happened to me once.
No, you woke up in surgery, Brad?
Well, I don't remember anything. Yes, my doctor told me about it, and it's embarrassing. Apparently, I woke up to surgery. I don't remember anything about it, but I woke up in the middle of surgery, and my doctor goes, "How do you know my wife?" I said, "I don't know," because I didn't know this guy personally. Yeah. I said, "Well, I don't know. Who's your wife? I don't know." He goes, "Well, you woke up during surgery," and he said, they were apparently.
Were you dreaming or like?
Well, no, apparently I could hear what they were saying, but I just don't remember it.
Gotcha.
And
so you weren't like fully alert.
Yeah, I wasn't fully alert, but like I was responding to things they were saying. Like the doctor would say.
Oh my goodness!
He said at one point I asked the one of the nurse whoever to hand me like whatever instrument he needed, and I said something like, "Well, I don't know where it is." I kept talking to him. So anyway, he said something about his wife, and apparently I told him that she had a big butt, and she's a good kisser or something like that.
You didn't know his wife at all?
No. Why did I say that?
That's hysterical, and I love it.
And he was cracking up. He was like,
did he think it was funny?
He thought it was hilarious. He said, we could not get you to shut up. He said,
it's funny.
And he said, they finally had to give me more medication to get me to shut up because I kept, anytime anyone would say anything, I would answer them. Yeah. But anyway, he said, when you said my wife had a big butt, but that she was a good kisser, he said, we decided we needed to put you.
It's time to put you under.
I was like, oh my gosh, why would I have said that?
That is so funny.
Yeah. And I don't remember any of it.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
That's crazy.
But she remembered it.
She remembered. Yeah. And they were doing open heart surgery. It was when they had her open.
Yeah. Now, okay, I've worked in the medical field for years, and I find it very hard, especially when you're having a surgery like that.
That could happen, though?
I think it could happen. I think people could wake up from surgery, but they use such heavy medications, and a lot of times these medications that they're on, they have like amnesia type effects on you.
Yeah.
which is why I can't remember
Right.
doing any of that.
Right.
This is one part of the story that I kind of am like,
Felt like
I'm not sure if that could really happen, because even if she did wake up, I find it very hard to believe that she
remembered
could remember.
I gotcha.
Maybe it happens. I'm not a doctor, but
Yeah, I don't know.
again, it was a cute little anecdote.
And it made you understand why she was scared to go under.
Yes, and it kind of gave a physical manifestation of her fears.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I agree. So maybe that's more the case.
It didn't take me out of the story, but
Yeah. So he calls Royer back and is like, I'm coming. Don't worry, I'll be there. And he also tells him, like, please don't let any of the people that are there for the test be people that I have worked with previously. I found that really interesting.
Yes.
And I think also too, right then, is when Annie tells him, like, that Dr. Royer's old partner is who she's been praying that his partner will come back, because Dr. Royer has told her that he can do this
miracle
surgery.
worker.
And can you imagine how that must have just hit him in the gut of, like, she's praying that I'll come back.
Yeah.
And he knows that it's him she's praying for.
Yeah. Well, and I marked something here. Ever since Annie, realized she needed a new heart, it says she has been praying that the doctor would show up at her lemonade stand and buy a cup of lemonade, because he would know she needed her help. And that's exactly what her prayers. God answered her prayers.
Yes.
Never underestimate the power of a prayer in kids.
I know. Never. No, never. And I never will. Do you know why? Because, after we had Stella, we thought we were pretty well done growing our family.
Yeah.
And then, 7 years later, the Lord's like, oh, hey, here's a surprise baby for you.
Yeah.
And we weren't mad or anything. Like,
it just wasn't planned.
Thank you, Lord. It just wasn't planned like the other two. And so Bellamy is like 6 months old, and we're in the car one day, and Stella goes, hey, Mom, do you know why we had Bellamy? And I was like, I mean, I guess because God decided we needed another baby, and he's got a plan for her, trying to give her this, like, not super deep, but like, okay, yeah, because God has a purpose for her.
Yeah.
And she's like, no, we had Bellamy because I prayed for her. I was like, this is your fault.
Next time you pray for something, run it by Mama first.
And she was like, I think I'm going to pray for a baby brother. I was like, don't you dare. Don't you dare.
God, Mama's gonna have to intervene on this one.
Yeah. So, yeah, no, children's prayers are effective.
They are effective. Well, they don't.
And the Bible even says that no one will enter the kingdom of heaven unless they come like a little child.
Exactly, and they don't know enough to know. Sometimes as adults, we're skeptical. Sometimes we're jaded.
Yeah, I think we know too much sometimes, and we get too in our heads.
We've been through too many disappointments. We've got too much of us in our heads. Yeah, and children aren't evolved enough in life to know that.
And they just see things as they are.
Yes.
Like, they're not taking it too deep. They're not overthinking, overanalyzing, going too far.
Very cut and dry. I want a sister. I'm going to pray for it.
That's right.
Yeah.
I want this doctor to do my surgery. I'm going to pray he shows up at my lemonade stand, buys a cup of lemonade for me, and does my surgery.
Yeah. And God said, boom.
Okay, here you go.
There you go. Yeah. Yeah.
So Cindy then asks Royer to reach out to Dr. Mitchell one more time. And he says that he already did, which he did.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so then Reese is like, okay, I have to decide if I'm going to do this or not. Like, it's make or break time. I have to decide if I'm going to do this surgery or if I'm out.
Yeah.
And so he takes him home. That was when the pipe burst at our house.
Yes. Well, and Royer looks at after the scan. Royer says he found the defect in Annie's heart. Along the old stitch line that was there, and it has weakened the muscles in her heart. And he says if Annie has any major chest impacts or even the remotest accident, her heart could rupture and it's over.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then they have no time to get there for a transplant.
Exactly.
Like, that's it.
Literally, it would be over in a matter of seconds. So, yeah.
So when their pipe bursts their house, that's when he invites them to stay at his house. And so basically Cindy and Annie start staying at Reese's, which in a way I think gives him peace of mind, because he's like, I'm there if something happens.
Again, it's like it was with
almost
Emma.
like a repeat of Emma's.
Yeah, because he at that point, he can, he can watch her, he can listen to her.
Yes.
Yeah. And I don't know at what point we want to say this, but part of when Emma died, he started taking medications.
So that's where we learn that in this part of where we're moving into.
Okay.
So he reads that final letter from Emma. He finally, now that they're staying with him, he's like, I have to read this letter.
Yes.
And that's where she reminds him again, like, you have to do this for other people.
Mhm.
Like, God gave you this gift. You have to use it to fix broken hearts.
Yeah.
And so then he goes and he reads that letter and he finally takes it and burns it again and makes the boat like they did, gets rid of it. So it's almost like he's made peace with it and he's going to move on. Like, he's going to go do the surgery. Like, you get the feel that, like, this was like Emma telling him, you have to fix this little girl, basically, is how I took it.
Yes.
And so that's where he takes Cindy into his office and explains, like, here's who I am. I am the miracle maker, which is what Royer calls him.
That's what Royer calls him.
And I am Mitchell. I'm Dr. Mitchell. This is like, and so obviously at first she's upset, but then she's just like,
because all this time you're like, the person we've been praying for has been right under our nose.
Yes. Yeah. But he feels like he has to confess to Cindy what happened with Emma. And so that's where he tells her, like, I had not been sleeping and I was taking stimulants to keep me awake, and then I was crashing. And so we learned that the night that Emma died, he
basically just collapsed out of exhaustion.
Yeah. And so he went into such a deep sleep that she had been trying to wake him, and he has scratches on his arms, like scars.
But he was so
out
that he
And so he tells Charlie, or he confesses that to Charlie, not to Cindy. He tells it to Charlie, and because he feels like he has to tell him because that's his sister.
Yeah, he basically feels like he's the reason she died,
and the reason that Charlie's blind. Like, he's carrying that too.
Yeah.
And so Charlie's like, dude, you got to stop blaming yourself.
Yeah. He said, you're the best doctor that has ever lived. Something to that effect.
Yes. Yeah. And Reese is like, and then he tells Cindy the truth about his identity.
Oh, and Charlie, I like this. Charlie tells him after he confesses that.
Yeah.
Charlie says, you need to stop being the living dead and do what you were born to do. Save people.
Yes. Well, and he also tells him too that, like, Emma wouldn't have lived as long as she did if Reese hadn't given her the hope that he had. You know, that he could fix her, and that hope is what kept her going for as long as it did.
Yeah.
So I really love that he was still encouraging him, like, man, you have to stop living in the past and just live. Just live. You know. Yeah, I love that. Then we move into where they get that first call for a heart, right?
Yes. And this is about a month later.
For Annie.
Yeah, this is about a month later. They get a call that a heart has come in that could be a match. So, of course, they jump into the action. They head to the hospital. Royer goes to Texas to get the heart. After harvesting the heart, Royer calls and says it's getting crunchy, which is the sign of a diseased heart.
Yeah.
So, but they still have two choices.
Yes.
Go ahead and put in the diseased heart with the knowledge that it's a Band-Aid. And you're probably going to have to do it again in 5 years or so, or pass on the heart and hope that another one comes in. Again, that's an impossible situation. Yeah. Like, if that were my family, I would say put the heart in because I want to have at least 3 or 4 or 5 more years.
Yeah.
But they eventually decide not to. They decide they don't want to take a chance with that. They don't want to put her
because they would just be having to do it again. So
exactly.
Soon.
Yeah. So they decide not to take it. This is the point where the tornado rips through the community, which throws Annie into an episode.
Yeah, so they're all, Annie's resting, and he and Cindy are outside, I think, right?
Yes,
like
they're
in the
outside.
workshop. And this tornado, this water spout, like turns up out of nowhere.
Yes.
And so he grabs them, and they end up hiding, taking shelter in the workshop, which was built into the hillside.
Yes.
So it was probably the safest place they could be.
And basically, the tornado jumped over them and kind of destroyed the house.
Yeah, it jumps over Charlie's house and lands right on Reese's.
Yes.
And destroys the whole thing.
Yes.
And so while they're riding out that tornado, though, he's holding Annie. And when it's over, he realizes Annie's not breathing. And, like, she's gone blue. And so her heart has failed the same way that Emma's had. And Reese has to basically repeat the same procedure again.
Yes.
On Annie in less than ideal conditions.
Crack open her chest, puncture her heart.
In the workshop.
So that the blood doesn't build in her.
Yes.
In her pericardium. And basically it compresses the heart to the point that it stops beating. He has to do the exact same thing.
Yes. And he's also transfusing his own blood into Annie's.
Yeah.
Because she has to have blood to survive this procedure.
Yeah.
And so he does that, and she survives. It works. The procedure's a success.
They get on a live flight, and they make it to the hospital, and she survives.
Yes. And so then Royer, the medical team works to stabilize her. And they're at their local hospital, right?
Yes.
Which is very small.
Yes, he really doesn't have everything he needs to, but he makes it work.
Yeah. And Royer sends their team, though,
Yes.
with all of the stuff to kind of convert it to a state-of-the-art transplant facility, basically.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And so they do that. They're waiting. Royer flies to Nashville to check on this other potential heart donor. Reese takes that time while he's doing that to kind of replenish his own body, eating something and, resting a little bit.
Yeah, and I think they even gave him a transfusion to replace some of the blood that he lost in giving it to Annie.
Yeah. And so then Reese and Royer do her transplant.
Okay, here's another one where, maybe I read it wrong like I did the last one, but it says they do the transplant. He can't get the heart going again, and Annie is decreed dead.
Yeah. So
and he
Royer
throws
calls
something across. Yeah,
Royer calls it,
but then in the next chapter, she's alive.
Well, because it says at the end of that chapter that he does something he had forgotten to do, or he didn't think about to do, and that's when right after Royer calls her, like declares her dead and calls time of death.
Yes,
he leans over and whispers that Bible verse.
Yes,
to her. That's on.
He begs her heart to start beating, and miraculously it does. Of course, you don't realize this.
He whispers that verse about being the wellspring of life. Guard your heart, for it is the wellspring of life. To her heart, and it does start beating again.
Yeah.
But no, they leave it hanging. You think she has died.
Yeah, until the next chapter, and then they're all sitting outside the lake, and Annie's there, and you're like, wait, how could she be there?
Later.
She just died.
She did survive.
Yeah.
And you don't realize that till like the very last. It's like the last paragraph,
chapter,
isn't it?
Yeah,
where he says that he's telling her what happened. Yeah. And he's like, tell me again.
And I'll be honest, I was mad at this point.
I kind of was too. I was like,
mad.
If that little girl dies, I'm out.
I'm
out.
Well, I was not only because she died, but I'm like, how can she be dead? And then there in the next paragraph, like that made me mad.
So it threw you again.
It threw me again, and I was irritated because I'm like, but then you don't know until literally the last paragraph why she's alive, and I'm like.
So there were lots of twists and turns through
There
this.
were, yeah.
But it was so good.
So good. I'm so glad we read it.
I'm glad we read it too. And like I said, I will be reading more of his work.
Yeah.
There was not one part of it that I felt like was... some of it was a little jarring. Like some of those transitions were a little hard. But I think... And I don't know enough. Like I said, this is the only one of his I've ever read. So I don't know if that's kind of his style. Like if they're all that way.
Yeah.
If they are, I think I'll be more prepared going into the next one.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to reading more of his just to see.
So do you have another one that you've already kind of scoped out that you think you're going to read next?
Not yet. At some point, the Mountain Between Us, I think I do want to read that one.
That was made into the movie.
Because I want to watch the movie, and I think I want to read the book first.
Yeah, I think so too.
Again, the book's usually better.
They're always better.
Yeah. So so that's one that I'll do, and maybe we'll do another one on the podcast soon.
That'd be fun. Yeah.
At some point. Yeah. We're not going to get in the habit of like doing
so many by the same author.
And in close succession. Like if we do another Charles Martin one, it's not going to be in 2 weeks.
No, it needs to be some space.
It'll be several months because we want to talk about other authors and books. Sure. But yeah, I definitely am going to read more.
And I think, like you said, it's worth mentioning that he is kind of in the minority of like male Christian fiction authors. So,
and that is my goal for this year. One of my goals for the podcast this year is to highlight some male authors.
Yeah.
I want to do some more well-known authors. That was kind of the goal from the very beginning, was to do some well-known authors at the very beginning of the podcast.
I think he kind of fits that both, right? Like he's well-known. He's the best-selling author from the New York Times.
Oh, he's a New York Times best-selling author, yeah.
And so he is well-known, but he's also a male Christian fiction.
Yes, author. Yeah. So I think that'll be.
He's kind of checking all your boxes.
Yeah, we kind of in the earlier story, even though we kind of fell against what we were planning to do, and we started doing more unknown authors, which I'm glad we did because I want to give them some.
Yeah.
I want to tell people about their books. So I definitely want to do a few more well-known authors in addition to the lesser-known authors, and definitely more men because there's not a lot of men in Christian fiction, and I want to highlight them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, to our listeners, can't recommend them enough.
For sure.
I really don't have anything bad to say. if you're emotional like me, have some tissues.
Yeah,
You'll need them because it's a journey.
Definitely a 5-star read. So anything else you want to say about the book?
I really don't think so.
Don't think so?
It was encouraging, and
yeah, it just kind of hit all the feels.
It did. It like you ran the gamut of emotions. There's some laughter, there's some sadness, there's some joy, there's some some sweet moments.
Some moments where I got frustrated.
And also some horror moments like, whoa, that is crazy to read about.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because you don't expect it.
There was some frustration throughout there. So, yeah.
Which to me is a mark of a good book. Some, I've seen some readers, that especially in I don't read reviews to know if I want to read a book. I tend to read reviews after because I don't need people's opinions. And that's basically,
I can make my own opinion.
Exactly. And that's basically what reviews are. They're just people's opinions. I don't want to know people's opinions. I want to read the book description, and that I'll use that to determine if I want to read the book or not. But I do tend to kind of read reviews after I read it just to see what other people thought of it.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, for the purposes of discussing the book on the podcast, it kind of helps you maybe inform other listeners, like, of what other people thought.
Yeah. So. And I just like not going into a book with preconceived notions. Yeah. I like to go into it with a fresh slate.
Listen, and I think we both went into this one not having any idea. Really.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I had no idea what to expect.
I didn't either. And it instantly, like we talked about, like it takes you for a ride from the first page.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I remember thinking, wow, this is going to be a wild ride.
I almost texted you and was like, nope. We're not talking about it until we're done. Until the podcast.
On the podcast, we tend to try to fight the urge to, because there were several times
I almost wanted to text you several times and be like, have you got to this part yet?
Yeah, same. And we try not to do that. And Melanie and I learned early on in the podcast, if we do that, if we get to talking about it too much, once we get into the podcast, we're like,
you've already said all the things.
Have we already said this? And it's like, so we try not to do that. So, but anyway, we've been on here for a while, so I think we'll probably go ahead and end this. Coming up on the next podcast, we're going to have an author on. It's called When Darkness Trembles. I think it's a young adult spiritual warfare novel.
Okay, I'll be looking forward to watching that.
Her name is Kelly Whitehead, I think, something like that. So I think it's just going to be me and the author on the podcast for that one. So that's what's coming up. We'd love to hear from you guys. Yes. For those of you listening, I just want to thank you guys so much. Our downloads on the podcast platforms have skyrocketed just in the last few months.
That's so cool.
Yeah, and we're getting listens from all over the country, not just in the United States.
All over the world.
Yeah, all over the world. Yeah, Japan, Singapore, just everywhere. Ukraine. So for all of you that are listening outside the country, of course, we love our United States listeners too. Yes. But for those of you that are outside the country, thank you so much for listening to us. It's so nice to know that we've got a little bit of reach outside of our little circle.
Well, and I find that so crazy. Like when you were texting me that the other day, I was like, man, who would have ever thought that like people would be interested in what we have to say about it?
Yeah. Like how do people in Switzerland even hear about us? You know, but it's the power of technology.
It's so cool.
Yeah. So, if you want to email us, we're at bookishintrovertspodcast@gmail.com. If you want to follow us on social media, we're on Instagram and Facebook as Bookish Introverts Podcast. And we have a newly made TikTok account, Bookish Introverts. I absolutely loathe TikTok, but
I don't even know anything about TikTok.
TikTok is the most toxic platform. But we're on there, but we're being very careful to like target our post just to Christian, because a lot of what we put on TikTok are more some of our deeper like theological type stuff. Yeah. And those are the videos. We've only got about 10 on there right now. Those are our most watched ones, like the ones where
I think that goes back to people are looking for truth.
They're hungry.
People want truth.
Yeah.
And they're looking for depth. People need hope and encouragement in this time that we live in.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think that speaks volumes. So, that's your most viewed content.
That's our most, yeah. And, and I have put a few out there because I'm kind of testing to see what people like on TikTok.
Yeah.
And I have put a few where we're actually talking about a book. Those are not doing as well. But the ones where we're talking about, like, there's one I posted where we're talking about leaning on God during times of anger. That Melanie and I mentioned something about that. There's one where you and I were doing that where we were talking about, I don't even remember now. I'd have to go back and look. But the ones where we're talking about more in-depth faith type stuff, those are the ones that are, so I'm like, that's probably what we're going to put mostly on TikTok.
I love that.
Yeah, some of our side discussions.
Yeah.
So anyway, so if you guys are into social media, reach out to us on any of those. Follow us. We'd love to hear from you guys.
You can watch on YouTube. You can listen on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Spotify
is where we get the most of our views. We're new on Pandora.
Oh yes, that's right.
We're new on Pandora. Pretty much any major podcast platform we're on. Yeah. So yeah, check us out, listen to us, watch us. Other than that, I think we will let you guys go, and we'll talk to you in 2 weeks. Yeah, we'll see you later.
See ya.
Bye.
Thanks for joining us on the Bookish Introverts podcast, where together we explore the worlds within the pages. Until next time, stay bookish.